It's a cold December night in Boston, 1773. The harbor is silent, except for the faint creak of wooden masts and the soft lapping of waves against the hulls of three British ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. Each ship carries a precious cargo, tea, thousands of pounds of it, fragrant, valuable, and taxed. As the town sleeps, a group of men move silently through the narrow, frosted streets. Their faces are smeared with ash. Feathers and paint disguise their identities. They're not thieves. They're not soldiers. They're ordinary citizens, merchants, blacksmiths, and carpenters, united by a single conviction that freedom is worth any price. Tonight, they will throw more than tea into the sea. They will cast away the rule of an empire, and without knowing it, they will spark revolution. In this video, we'll uncover the story of the Boston Tea Party, the night ordinary citizens defied an empire. You'll see how a simple act of protest against a small tax became the spark that ignited the American Revolution. We'll explore who the Sons of Liberty were, what led to the destruction of over 340 chests of tea, and how that single night changed the course of world history. The story begins years earlier, at the end of the 7 Years' War, fought between Britain and France for dominance around the world. Britain emerged victorious, but nearly bankrupt. To recover, Parliament turned to its 13 American colonies for help. Taxes were introduced. First the Sugar Act, 1764, then the Stamp Act, 1765, and later the Townshend Acts, 1767. The colonists were furious. They had no representatives in the British Parliament, yet were being forced to fund an empire an ocean away. Across taverns, churches, and meeting halls, a phrase echoed: "No taxation without representation." These weren't just words. They were a declaration of principle that free men should not be taxed without their consent. By 1773, Britain passed another law, the Tea Act, designed to rescue the struggling British East India Company, one of the most powerful corporations on earth. It allowed the company to sell its vast stores of tea directly to the colonies, bypassing colonial merchants. It made tea cheaper, but it came with a tax. And to the colonists, that small tax was a symbol of something far bigger: submission. Boston, Massachusetts, was already a powder keg. For years, it had been the center of protest, home to boycotts, clashes, and angry debates. At the heart of this resistance was a secret organization, the Sons of Liberty, led by Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Paul Revere, men who saw British control as a violation of their rights. In late November 1773, 3 ships arrived in Boston Harbor, each carrying hundreds of tea chests from the East India Company. The colonists demanded the ships turn back to Britain, but the royal governor, Thomas Hutchinson, refused. He insisted the ships stay until the cargo was unloaded and the tax paid. If the tea was not removed within 20 days, it would be seized by British customs. The clock was ticking. Boston was about to erupt. On the evening of the 16th of December 1773, thousands of residents packed into Old South Meeting House, the largest building in colonial Boston. Candles flickered against the walls as angry voices filled the hall. For hours, the crowd argued, demanded, pleaded. And finally, when it became clear the governor would not yield, Samuel Adams rose and spoke 9 words that would echo through history. "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." That sentence was the spark. As the crowd spilled out of the meeting house, a group of men moved quickly towards Griffin's Wharf. They were anywhere between 100 and 150 carpenters, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, and apprentices, all sworn to secrecy. To hide their identities, they disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians, not to mock, but to symbolize their new American identity, separate from Britain. They carried no guns, only hatchets and determination. At around 7 o'clock, they boarded the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. The night was cold and clear. The sea was calm. And for the next 3 hours, Boston Harbor became the stage for one of the most daring acts of civil disobedience in history. The men broke open 342 chests of tea, each weighing about 45 kilograms, and dumped them overboard. That's almost 45 tons of tea, worth 10,000 pounds in 1773, or more than 1.5 million pounds today. Eyewitnesses said the water turned brown, and that the smell of tea lingered in the air for days. One participant later wrote, "We were surrounded by the silent approval of thousands who looked on from the shore. The night was still and solemn. We understood the weight of what we were doing. When one man tried to steal a handful of tea leaves, he was thrown into the harbor by the others. This wasn't looting. It was a statement. And when they were done, they swept the decks clean, saluted the captains, and vanished into the night." The morning after, Boston woke to an extraordinary sight. The harbor surface glimmering with soaked tea leaves, the scent filling the air like a giant teapot. Here are some remarkable facts about that night. No lives were lost. The protest was entirely peaceful, controlled, strategic, and disciplined. The tea destroyed came from China, not Britain. It was part of a global trade route spanning continents. Many participants smelled of tea for days, making it nearly impossible to keep their identities secret at home. The youngest protester was believed to be just 16 years old. Some of the wooden tea chests were later recovered, and a few are still preserved in museums today. The event wasn't called the Boston Tea Party until 50 years later, when survivors began recounting their memories to a new generation. Even George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, who both criticized the act at first, would later recognize it as the turning point of the revolution. When news of the destruction reached London, Parliament erupted in fury. The King, George III, called it an act of treason. In 1774, Britain passed a series of punitive measures known as the Coercive Acts, or, as the colonists called them, the Intolerable Acts. They closed Boston Harbor until the tea was paid for, placed Massachusetts under military rule, and forced colonists to house British troops. But these punishments backfired spectacularly. The colonies saw them as proof that Britain intended to crush their freedoms entirely. So, in September 1774, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress, first step towards independence. Just months later, the first shots of the American Revolutionary War would ring out at Lexington and Concord. The Boston Tea Party had lit the fuse. The Boston Tea Party was more than a protest about tea. It was about rights, identity, and courage. It showed that a population, ordinary men and women, could stand against the most powerful empire on earth and demand to be heard. It turned frustration into unity, and unity into revolution. Today, Boston remembers that night with pride. At the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum, visitors can walk aboard full-scale replicas of the ships and even throw crates of tea into the harbor, just as the rebels did 2.5 centuries ago. Every December, people gather at the Old South Meeting House to reenact the debate that changed history. The legacy of that night lives on, not just in America, But anywhere, people resist oppression and defend liberty. Because freedom, like tea, is steeped in struggle. And on that cold December night in 1773, the people of Boston brewed the first taste of independence. From the quiet decks of 3 ships to the birth of a nation, the Boston Tea Party reminds us that courage is contagious, and history can turn on the simplest of acts. One night, 3 ships, and a sea full of tea. The night the world changed forever.